A study by researcher Goda Gedikaite shows that as we get older, our fear of death decreases. You might think it would be the opposite. We might tend to believe that the older a person is, the closer they are to death, and therefore their fear of death would increase. But interestingly, old age is associated with a greater acceptance of death. Orochimaru has a certain distant relationship with death. He avoids it at all costs and he succeeds. So, as we grow older, we start to accept our own reality, accepting that there are some things we can't do and that everything comes to an end. But Orochimaru doesn't think that way. Today, we're going to talk about a character who has a deep fear of death. Orochimaru is the first villain in Naruto, the first one shown to us. And he was always very mysterious, right? So when I watched Naruto as a kid, I was scared to see Orochimaru. Orochimaru was also always a hard character to understand, very enigmatic. He's one of the best villains in Naruto, and his influence on the story is incredible. Some things set him apart from other characters, like his lack of attachment to anyone or almost anyone. Orochimaru, like Itachi, is also more quiet, reserved, and likes to stay in his own world. This also leads him to isolation. It's as if, in fact, he was alone in the world because no one really understood him. Even though he always had disciples and people around him, he was always very solitary in his plans and goals. And this behavior of isolating himself was seen since he was a child. Somehow he developed a kind of aversion to death. He doesn't want to live forever out of some inherently evil reason. Orochimaru really loves knowledge and he feels he needs to live a long time to learn everything he wants to know. Well, but that's not all. Orochimaru has a deep tendency to focus a lot on himself and he forgets about those around him. He has low empathy. There's a lot of discussion about what led Orochimaru to become this way. We can point to a few things like the fact that he lost his parents at a very young age. This made him question Hiruzen about the meaning of life. It's at this moment that he starts to understand the meaning of the serpent, the symbol of immortality it carries. So the symbolism of immortality and the search for meaning in life were always on his mind. So in fact, maybe these losses, not just his parents, had a big impact on him. About 5% of young people lose their parents before reaching adulthood. Early parental loss is associated with negative outcomes such as anxiety, depression, prolonged grief reactions, negative effects on sense of identity, increased risk of suicide, substance abuse, and eating disorders. Losing one's parents or primary caregivers can be one of the greatest pains a child can experience. And it seems that this shaped Orochimaru's sense of identity. Since he was a child, Orochimaru also always displayed some more sadistic behaviors, as if he truly had some deficits in empathy. Another point that seems to have influenced him a lot was witnessing Nawaki's death and, consequently, Tsunade's suffering over his loss. So just like what happened with Itachi, the environment of wars also seems to have influenced him a lot. And maybe all of this combined gave him this feeling of wanting to be immortal. This desire of his becomes almost like a kind of obsession. He simply doesn't want to accept his own mortality. For him, he needs to live a long time because his goals are so complex that a simple, normal life wouldn't be enough. Another point is that Orochimaru is a child who is above average in terms of intelligence. And many intelligent children are perfectionists. Because they're able to do well, they start to believe they must perform every task perfectly. They can get upset over small mistakes, always focusing on what's wrong instead of what's right. And Orochimaru has always had a big deficit when it comes to relating to his peers. It was as if he didn't fit in with people his own age. Some children display different behaviors compared to their peers. Some don't adapt, are highly focused on unusual interests, or seem more distracted or inattentive than others their age, as is the case with Orochimaru. These characteristics can be traits of giftedness, or they may be signs of an emotional problem. In some cases, such as attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD, or autism spectrum disorder. And in fact, Orochimaru, in a hypothetical scenario, could indeed be a gifted child. He is definitely not like other people. So, combining his enormous intelligence, his personality that was extremely driven by curiosity, and the era in which he lived, full of wars and losses, all of this further fueled his goals, which were different and quite unique compared to others. We can say that the course of Orochimaru's life becomes even more specific when he joins the Anbu. There he meets two of his disciples who were important to him, both Anko and Kabuto. It's clear how he shows a certain attachment to Kabuto, as if he sees a bit of himself in him. And the two are quite similar. Both are curious, both have this need to belong to something greater. They're very connected, and Orochimaru notices this. This is a trait that Orochimaru uses a lot in the anime, attracting people, but I'll talk more about that in a bit. Orochimaru is also quite pragmatic. You probably remember the classic scene where he, Jiraiya, and Tsunade meet Nagato's group, Nagato, Yahiko, and Konan. When he finds those children in the midst of war, his first solution isn't to protect them but to kill them, because according to him, they would suffer more if they kept on living. So he has this more cynical view of life. He cares about strong people, about those who can bring him some benefit. He thinks a lot about himself, only about himself. When he sees Naruto at the beginning of the anime, he looks down on Naruto. Naruto's weak. It's only later that he comes to admire him. But this fear of death is the main point. Orochimaru asks Hiruzen if he will see his parents again, and the Leaf Hokage doesn't know the answer to that question. And it turns out that the way we think about death can affect how we act and think in our daily lives. For example, a study found that fear of death could amplify our desire for revenge and political violence. Palestinian, Israeli, and South Korean participants were prompted to think about pain or their own death, and then were asked about their opinions on specific political conflicts that needed to be resolved. Those who were reminded of death were more likely to support military action than those who only thought about pain and not death. And Orochimaru might also have experienced a kind of more complicated grief. Fearing death can also make us fear grief more. Fearing death can make it harder for us to process grief. A recent study found that those who feared death were more likely to experience prolonged symptoms of grief after losing a loved one, compared to those who accepted death. Orochimaru wanted to have a kind of control over it. And let's be honest, in the Naruto universe, it's actually possible in some way Hayden was immortal. So even though he was obsessed with it, there was some logic to what he wanted. So we can't really say that Orochimaru was living in denial, since there was a possibility he could achieve what he wanted. And it's interesting how almost everything becomes a kind of obsession for Orochimaru. Just remember his main goal of possessing Sasuke's body. And that's where his manipulation comes in. Because he clearly understands human beings, he understands people, which is why he's able to attract followers. And it's a negative form of manipulation because he doesn't care at all about his followers, he doesn't care about Sasuke or anyone else. Everyone is useful to him in some way, as long as that person serves a purpose for him. And that's why he's kind of immune to the pain of losing someone, even someone close. He just doesn't care. That person was just a tool. When he joins the Akatsuki, he doesn't have a noble goal like Nagato would. Instead, he wants to gain more knowledge to achieve his own objectives. And all of this is fueled by himself, by the sense of self-importance he gives himself. And when you add that to his pursuit of knowledge, we end up with an extremely ruthless villain. Orochimaru's purpose in life is precisely the pursuit of knowledge. That's what he lives for. He needs to find something to feed his curiosity. Studies show the many benefits of curiosity. Among them are improved memory, creativity, and those precious flow states. Another study showed that curiosity is associated with greater life satisfaction, and contrary to the saying that curiosity killed the cat, it has also been linked to healthy aging. Recent studies show that curiosity can be a protective factor against anxiety and depression, and that creative interventions can enhance curiosity, bringing individuals a range of benefits. Maybe that's why Orochimaru found in curiosity the best way to deal with life and with the pain he experienced in the past. The psychologist George Lowenstein sees curiosity as something that arises when attention is focused on a gap in one's knowledge. Such gaps in information produce a feeling of deprivation, so the curious person would be motivated to obtain having the missing information to reduce or eliminate this feeling of deprivation. But this search for knowledge, for curiosity, may never be satisfied. This could reveal just how much Orochimaru is never content with anything. He is always looking for something more. There is a connection between curiosity or the search for novelty and the reward system. The need for novelty is something innate to human beings. We all have it, but some people are more vulnerable to this excess of novelty. Some people, like Orochimaru, get bored more quickly. This can drive someone to seek more and sometimes not be satisfied with what they already have. For some people, boredom can be almost unbearable, as it seems to be for Orochimaru. In one experiment, people chose to give themselves electric shocks instead of just sitting in a room with nothing else to do. In other words, for many people, having something happen, even if it's bad, is better than nothing happening at all. Another study showed that some people get bored even when looking at positive images. And some people seek out negative images to relieve their boredom. There's nothing necessarily wrong with that. It's more a matter of how each person is different and how everyone works in their own way. Boredom for Orochimaru is ambiguous because that same boredom made him seek knowledge and become very powerful. In other words, the same boredom that could have made him never satisfied with anything gave him the motivation to achieve more and become stronger. Well, several times he died, but he didn't really die. In his last resurrection, already in Boruto, we see him different, with more pro-social attitudes. It seems like he kind of lost that sense of seeking novelty up until then. He talks about having lived for a very long time. That definitely influenced him in this regard. Orochimaru's journey is one of pain, suffering, but above all of non-acceptance. All of us humans have some kind of fear of death, of growing old, of losing our family, of not being remembered. The worst part is that all of this will happen one day. Orochimaru also realized that he wouldn't be able to do everything he wanted, even with the long life he had. Imagine us, the fear of death can help. It can help us make the most of things, to value the little things more. And above all, it can't paralyze you or make you create a grand illusion. Because as Mark Twain used to say, the fear of death comes from the fear of life. A man who lives fully is prepared to die at any moment.